Continuing an interview that we ended off in the last hour here on Morning Live, and just to remind you of the conversation, former South African Prime Minister Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid, said back in 1963, Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state. Well, since then, there have been several senior and more appropriate South Africans who have compared apartheid South Africa to current-day Israel. One, including, is Ahmed Kathrada. Others, Denis Goldberg, Kader, Asmal, Nzimande, and many more. Now, as part of the 10th Israeli Apartheid Week campaign, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation this weekend launched an international campaign lobbying for the release of political prisoner Marwan Barghouti and other Palestinian political prisoners. Marwan Barghouti is a Palestinian political prisoner currently in Israeli detention. He has been for 12 years now. He's been touted as the Palestinian Mandela, a unifying figure across Palestinian political divides, with even some support in Israel. Staying on with us this morning, we're very happy to have Marwan Barghouti's son, Qassam Barghouti. It's good to have you. Thank you very much for staying on to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk a little bit about Ahmed Kathrada, his involvement, his visits to Palestine, and why he's pushing forward with something like this.
Well, I think it was a big honor and a big push for the international campaign to have Mr. Ahmed Kathrada as a political prisoner himself for 27 years at Robben Island. So that was a big push for the and support for the family and for the struggle for Palestinian political prisoners. He was there in October 2013, and he saw himself the suffering of the Palestinian people. And I think this was the reason of why he chose to help in this file, and he wanted to support the Palestinians in their campaign for political prisoners, because he was part of this suffering, and he had witnessed many times what it means to be a political prisoner, spending many years. It was very moving to see him talking to some Palestinian prisoners who spent the same period of time in Israeli prisons, and some of them were more than 27 years in prison. They were sharing the same stories and memories, because political prisoners have the same values and the same situations wherever they are in the world.
Yeah. How are negotiations going with the Israeli government to free your father and other political prisoners?
Well, as everybody knows, the Palestinians have many times announced that they want the two-state solution, and they are willing to sit with the Israeli side and negotiate. But unfortunately, we've been doing this in the peace process since 1994. The last time after the Palestinian president and the Palestinian leadership went to the United Nations asking for Palestine as a member in the United States, in the United Nations, after that, a pressure was put on the Palestinian leadership to go back to the negotiations with the Israeli side and try to get some results out of that. Well, the only result so far is to release some prisoners who spent more than 20 years in Israeli prisons, and now any talks to postpone the negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis would lead to release of Palestinian leaders inside Israeli prisons, and one of the most important leaders, I think, for Palestinians is Marwan Barghouti.
Do you think if your father is released from prison, it'll lead to peace, or do you think it just might erupt into even further conflict in the area? Well,
I think who should be asked about the peace and why the peace hasn't been there yet is the Israeli government. The oppression, the continuous oppression of the Israeli government, is the reason why we don't have peace in our area so far. The Middle East crisis as a whole, as everybody knows, started from the problem and the crisis we have in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So if the Israeli government is willing to give Palestinians their rights and give them their state, independent state, with full rights for civilians that live there, I think peace will be applicable tomorrow on the ground.
Just very quickly, we're running out of time, Qassam, but just in terms of, you were in prison for 4 years as well. I mean, in fact, you spent 2 months in jail with your father. What are the conditions like there?
Well, like the period that you spend in Israeli prisons is very hard always, because we are talking about lots of psychological torturing, and the first period that you go into the questioning and the pressure they put on, especially in my case, because I was a tool to put pressure on my father. That was the main idea behind having me as prisoner. And it started when I was like 18 years old, going back from Egypt when I was a student in the American university there. And I came back to the country, and I found myself in prison. I kept asking to go see my father. I was allowed to go see him 3 years after my arrest. And it was very hard to share this experience with my father in the same cell for 2 months. But we have our beliefs, and we have our hope to get this struggle to where it should go, and to achieve our goals at the end of having a Palestinian independent, free state, just like any other people on the earth.
All right, continuing to work alongside the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and you can follow the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation on Twitter. It's on your screen right now. That's the Twitter handle. And thank you for being with us. When do you leave South Africa?
Oh, I am leaving on Sunday, but I think we have a lot of work to do before we leave.
You said you arrived on Monday. You feel like you've been here for a month. You've been doing so much.
It's a very beautiful country, and I'm honored to be here, honestly.
Thank you very much for popping by to have a chat with us.